This is Lysha Holmes, and I'm your host of the Recruitment podcast. And if you've clicked on this week's episode, it's because you are potentially considering starting your own podcast. And as someone who did it quite accidentally back in 2020, with our season 6 well underway, I thought it would be very opportune to give you some of my insider tips as to what I think you should do if you're thinking about joining this incredible medium and what I think is a community that will just continue to grow and grow. So, a little bit of story of the Recruitment podcast, because it wasn't actually my first ever podcast. If you've been following me over on LinkedIn for a number of years, you'll know that pre 2020, I actually had a podcast called The Key Moment. So, my business is Key Recruitment, QUI. And as well as having an acronym of quality, urgency, and integrity, I do believe that key is a perfect pun for having the key moment in life, that eureka moment, that special pivotal point in any decision making process. And so back in 2018 into 2019, I actually had a 1 year show, which was actually recorded in a studio with an actual technician. And each week I would bring in 2 or 3 guests and we would do a live, a recorded episode in person. And we would then share that across our community. That particular technician actually then left the industry, and I decided to pause doing it myself because I didn't have the technical capability. And then COVID happened, and as many of you, if you work through the COVID first lockdown, you kind of found yourself going, how am I going to connect to people? How am I going to still continue to have meaningful conversations where you're not just saying things are really crap and what can I do? I don't know how to do business development. I don't know how to create revenue. And so that's how the Recruitment podcast was born, because about the July time, I started doing loads of video interviews with people that I thought would be really useful to those that were maybe going through their first ever downturn, just from a well-being perspective, but also from a commercial and business perspective as well. And before I knew it, I had curated quite an impressive array of guests. And then the one that really put us on the map was Greg Savage, who we shared in September 2020. And for that moment, I think the Recruitment podcast was really put on the map. So that was 5 whole seasons ago. And you're listening to this now in season 6. And I guess if I was sat in a position listening now as someone who I listen to podcasts all the time, I must have about 25 favourites I listen on over on Spotify. And that is a vast array from business, recruitment, well-being, health, nutrition, history, my real history boffin, amusing ones, anecdotes, food ones. I believe that the more, it's a bit like reading. The more you listen to podcasts, the more you get ideas, the more you get inspired, and the more you can, I guess, think about what you would do if you had your own show. So I'm not talking about plagiarism. I think it's really important that when you are running your own podcast, the most important thing is understanding who your audience is. Who is your target audience? Who is it you're speaking to? I've always been very clear that for me, the Recruitment podcast is open to anyone in the industry to listen to, whether you're in, the early stages of your career, you're starting out and you're trying to learn and be developed by as many experts as possible, or whether, like me, you've been in the industry for a really long time and you just enjoy learning and you never stop learning and you just want to continue to self-develop and you use podcasts as your sort of free expert advice and business coach, basically. But it's knowing who your audience is, and then I think deciding on why your podcast will appeal to that audience and then what is it they're going to want to listen to. That's where I think understanding what's already out there is really important, because I think it's making sure you're being totally original, but equally making sure that you're not missing the point, you're reading the room properly. So I do think it's really important to listen and watch and see what other people are doing and decide whether or not your unique podcast and what you're going to sort of position it as has actually got a place and it will have an audience. But I think until you decide, it's got to be your starting point. I think the next point that a lot of people tend to miss or get wrong is understanding and implementing a cadence in their interview style that suits who they are. So there are I listen to lots of people interviewing lots of hosts, and the ones that I tend to find are the most magnetic are the ones that are doing their natural style. For me, what I've realized is that my cadence is organic, it's natural flow, it's, getting to know somebody on a personal level. It's not being too scripted because I actually tend to not look down at my notes as I'm doing now. I'm just doing this off the cuff. I think it's really important that you understand that. But if you know that as a potential broadcaster and host, you might get lost, you might stumble, you might not be able to remember things, you might find it difficult to keep that, whoever you're interviewing, deciding who you want to interview, it might be better to have a script and pre-agree it. So I think it's understanding how that works best for your style. So my advice would be to do a few demo interviews before you actually launch your podcast. So do it with colleagues, do it with partners, do it with friends, family, whoever you feel like you need to do it with, because you will then start to don't just interview somebody on your first go and share that, because the reality is it's probably going to be a bit clunky. That's my advice anyway. It's no secret that I book my podcast recording days in advance. I tend to record a quarter ahead. And on each recording day, I book in between 4 and 6 guests whom I've either approached because it's people that I know well, that I think our audience would really want to listen to, or very often it's people that have approached me to say, can I come on your show? Very much in the sense of, it's not about creating publicity, it's not about selling anything. That's never what it should be about. It should be about having somebody on your podcast that you think will provide value and entertainment. At the end of the day, we're here to be entertained. So don't ask people that you think won't be those things. I don't mean you necessarily need to have extroverts on there, but I think it needs to be people that can talk very succinctly and eloquently. And by booking in advance, to go back to the point, I think you then create this flow in your work month where you know that you need to dedicate some time to doing that. But it means that one day all you're thinking about is broadcasting. All you're thinking about is, getting the best out of these people. That's how it works best for me. That's how it's worked best for me for the last 5 seasons. And it means then, apart from anything else, if you are looking to do something that commercially is not going to have a negative impact, it means that for the rest of the month, you don't need to think about what you're generating in terms of PR and marketing. It's very important that you invest in the right technology. And this podcast isn't actually going to go through all the different elements. We do actually have a playbook, which Lilia, the producer of my show, is more than happy to work on your behalf. We have actually created it as a service product that you can buy. But in terms of the technology that you need to invest in, it's like anything, there is so much available. So it's important to make sure that you are investing in the right technology for your podcast, and you don't need to get all flashy. In my opinion, for me, podcast isn't about watching. I know I'm recording this now on a video, but it's about listening. It's about doing it while you're on the walk, on a school run, while you're driving to the office, when you're getting ready in the morning, whether you're doing it on your lunchtime break. I think it should be about the content and the quality of the content rather than how flashy it looks. That's just my personal opinion, but that's what keeps it authentic to me. So like anything, don't be a magpie. You don't need to spend a lot of money, I don't think, on launching a podcast. And I think it's going to come on to a point in a minute about the monetization of it. It's very important to engage with the community, even if it's 10 people. As soon as you start to get, build out that network of people, you need to start thinking about how to engage with them, how to get this out, how am I going to share it? What's the best way to share it? You might have come to this podcast through LinkedIn. It might have been through our TikTok page. Maybe it's through our Instagram. Maybe it's literally through the podcast channel. So you need to understand where your community is and go and engage with them. So moving on to the monetization, I think so many times I get messages off people who have already got their podcasts, and they ask me about the sponsorship that I have with Paiger. They ask me about the partnerships that I have with our partners, of which there are many now, which is fantastic. I never share commercial information, by the way, because I believe that's something that's quite, privileged information between myself and those partners. However, if you are going to launch a podcast to monetize it, I think it's the wrong way around. I think it should be a secondary benefit if you can then create some sort of commercial revenue from it. The ROI on a podcast should come from creating that perpetual value, elevating yourself as an expert in your field by the people that you're engaging with. And it's the karma effect, it's the cascade effect of, for example, I can interview somebody on my podcast who maybe is a client of mine. And then when I've got a candidate that is interviewing with that person, I can then send them the podcast episode and say, look, before you go meet them, it'd be worthwhile you listening to this because it'll give you some insight into, Joe Bloggs, who's the founder of this company. They were on my podcast last year. And I can guarantee that that always gives the best insights into who that decision maker is. So it's a really good way to connect with your community in a recruitment sense as well. But also from a business development tool, it can be really useful if you want to send out introductions to target clients, prospects, to ask them to come on as experts, because that's obviously a very flattering way to do it. So I think it's having the right intentions of why you would do that rather than it being, I'm creating a podcast to make money. If you do it that way around, I don't think you ever will ever. It's a very crowded space, and I don't think you'll ever really do that. So I think it's about having the right intentions, and then from that you will create an ROI. Um, my final point is one that is inherent all the way through every single thing that I've done in my 27-year recruitment career, which is that you do everything with integrity. So every interview that you have, every guest that you invite on, every post that you share about your podcast, and every way that you utilize that podcast then to create an ROI should be done with integrity at all times. Because if it doesn't, it just makes you look really cheap, in my opinion. So I think podcasts are brilliant. I think they're here to stay. I think they will evolve like anything. I think that they are evergreen. I still go back and listen to podcasts from 3, 4, 5 years ago. I think it's quite interesting when you listen to a podcast that was done in lockdown, for example, because you just think, wow, the world was so crazy. So I think it's a really great way to pinpoint yourself and create something that's really meaningful for your own community. I really hope you have found this useful. As I mentioned earlier on, if you are thinking of launching a podcast, you don't have the time to run your podcast, we do have our own service offering. So just drop myself or Lilia Holmes a message. But if you're thinking of going for it, my view is do it. What can you do to regret it? There is a magic number, they say, to get to 50 episodes means that you're very unlikely to disappear off the face of the podcast map. So that's a pretty big number. So I look forward to knowing whether this is something that has inspired you. Maybe it's put you off. Maybe it's made you think, actually, I'm going to think twice before I do it. But I really want to know what you think. And for those fellow podcasts that I know, listen, my fellow podcasters, because I've been on plenty of other people's shows, what would you add? What have I missed? Probably missed loads because I haven't done any notes on this. So I want to know what you think and can't wait to hopefully see lots more podcasts out there in the ether. Thank you so much for listening to this special show of the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast, and we can't wait for your feedback.